Shalom, everyone, and welcome to In Second Thought from Hadran. We're studying Masechet Zevachim, which deals with Korbanot, with the animal sacrifices mostly. And I think that an underlying question should be, how come we're all of a sudden allowed to eat meat, to kill and eat animals with all the restrictions? But when did that happen, and why did that happen? And how come after we know that Adam HaRishon and Chava were vegetarians, now we can eat meat? And let me share the sources, and we'll start delving in this question. So the verse in Sefer Bereshit is very clear. And God said, behold, I have given you every herb yielding seed, which is upon the face of all the earth, and every tree in which is the fruit of a tree yielding seed, to you it shall be for food. This is what you can eat. You can eat the seeds. You can eat the seed on earth, and you can eat the tree yielding seed. This is a vegetarian diet that you can eat. And indeed, the Gemara in Sanhedrin asks, meat was not permitted to Adam for consumption, as it is written in the pasuk that we have just read. But the Gemara raises an objection to the assertion that the eating meat was prohibited to Adam and Chava, because it says, and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over all the fowl of the air and every living thing that creeps upon the land. What is it not stated with regard to consumption? Doesn't that mean when the Torah tells us you shall domain every living creature, does not mean it doesn't regard to consumption? And the answer of the Gemara is no. The verse is referring to using animals for labor, but not eating. In other words, indeed, Adam and Chava were not permitted to eat meat. And the wording urdu, domain, and all the animals around, it's just for using them for labor, but not for consumption. And Rashi on Sefer Bereshit is asking, and to every beast of the earth, and Rashi on the verse and to every beast of the earth, Scripture, says Rashi, places cattle and beast on one level with humans, that is placing all alike in the same category. Both men and animals, human and animals, are eating vegetables and fruit for food, and did not permit Adam to kill any creature and eat its flesh, but all alike were to eat herbs. But when the era of the sons of Noah began, God permitted them to eat meat, for it is said, every moving living that lives should be for food for yourselves, even as the herbs that I permitted to the first men, so do I give you everything. In other words, for Rashi is very clear to say, we understand for what God is telling Noah, that what was permitted for now is adding eating meat. As I told Adam, you can eat all the herbs. Now I tell you, you can eat everything, including the animals. And the Radak, Rabbi David Kimchi, is adding a very interesting comment, and he says, permission to eat meat would be granted only after the Mabul, and we are not sure of the reason for this. Says Radak, I don't understand. Like, if God eventually is going to permit eating meat, why wasn't it there with Adam and Chava? Why wait to Noah? And his answer is, perhaps the reason is that God had already foreseen that during the generation of the Mabul, Noah would be the one who would be directly instrumental in saving the animals, and permission to eat meat became part of Noah's reward for his labor feeding the animal in the ark for a full year, and seeing that God does not withhold reward from any creature, he would certainly not withhold it from a human being as a reward. In other words, Noah gave Mesirut Nefesh. Noah worked hard to feed the animals. Therefore, now it was the time to reveal to the world that people can eat meat. But the question with eating meat, with eating animals in the Torah, as we recall, connects to different ideas of eating meat. Yes, there's a limit in terms of which animals we can eat and how we need to slaughter them in a certain place. But in Sefer Dvarim, in the Deuteronomy, the Torah in chapter 12, this is the chapter when the Torah is saying, God is telling the people, you're going to enter the land and you're going to go to the place where I'll show you, and you will build the temple, and you will bring sacrifices. And Moshe, in his last speech that lasted over a month, is telling the following to the people of Israel. When God enlarges your territory, in other words, when you're going to enter the land and you have your own land as promised, and you say, I shall eat some meat, for you have the urge to eat meat, you may eat meat whenever you wish. But the English doesn't hold the usage of the Hebrew with the word ta'ava, desire, lust even. What is the story about? You're going to enter the land, and then if you wish, if you desire to eat, if you have an urge to eat the meat, you can eat the meat. And Rashi says, the Torah teaches us the proper rule of life, that one should not desire to eat flesh unless he lives amidst abundance and wealth. In other words, Rashi is saying eating meat is not an everyday thing. And eating meat should be only when you have plentiful, only when you have already come down and you have your land and you have you have an abundance of wealth, then okay, and have some meat, but not, as a constant thing that you always desire to have. And continues Rashi to say, why does the Torah have to say that it is okay now when you enter the land to desire meat? Because in the wilderness, in the desert, however, the flesh of a non-holy animal was forbidden them as food unless one first dedicated it to the altar and offered it as a peace offering. In other words, in the desert, they couldn't just take an animal, a kosher animal, and shachtan it and eat it. It was only allowed if you bring it to be a sacrifice, a korban, as a korban shlamim. There you can have part of the korban to eat the meat. But now when you enter the land, you'll be allowed to eat meat outside of the temple if you do the right kashrut rules of shchita and what to do with the blood, and of course only kosher animals. But the Orach Chaim HaKadosh, Rabbi Chaim Attar, is adding another aspect. We all have the memory of another group of people of Israel lusting meat when they come out of Mitzrayim, and they are eager to have meat, and God is bringing the slav, in masses, and they almost suffocated from eating the meat, and those people were buried in a place where they called it kivrot hata'ava, the graveyard of their lust. And says the Orach Chaim, seeing God had objected to the excessive craving for a meat diet displayed by the Israelites in Sefer B'Midbar, where we were told about the thousands dying on account. Such a craving had been taboo ever since. Since then, people did not admit or did not want to say that they're eager for meat. Only meat which had first been hollowed as a sacrifice had been permitted to be eaten in the desert by the average Israelite during the last 38 years. At this point, Moshe justifies the new legislation which sanction the desire to have a meat diet by referring to the difficulty of making the meat first a sacrifice and having to travel to Jerusalem to do so. It is assumed that the craving will resurface as a result of most people living a long way from Jerusalem. And God specifically sanctioned the desire to eat meat with the words, "You may eat meat in accordance with all the desire of your soul." In other words, it's okay now to desire meat. If you want to do it through a sacrifice, you go to Jerusalem. If not, there's a certain permission to eat meat outside of the temple, but it was important to declare that now it's okay to desire meat, and we're still not under the impression of Hamit Avim, who lusted meat and died in the desert. Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Berlin, Hanatziv, in his Perush Ha'amek Davar, is using the words of Rashi, but he's saying, when God will vast your borders, he's talking about in wealth. In other words, he says, as for the way of the rich to eat meat, even if they do not desire it, or because they desire it, etc., even without expanding their borders and wealth. In other words, says a Netziv Volozhin, there's a state where a person from Israel, even though he's not in the land of Israel, and even if he doesn't have a lot of richness, okay, and he desires to eat meat, it's okay to eat meat. Why are we talking about wealth? Says the Amek Davar, for a rich person, eating meat is not a big thing. It can eat meat every day. But if a common person, a simple person, an average person wants to eat meat, it's okay now to eat meat, and even without expanding the borders and wealth. The idea of the permission of eating meat is, of course, and we hear in the Midrash in Vayikra, that of course you have to do it only by means of slaughter. But there's another discussion in the Gemara in Masechet Pesachim, that the Gemara discusses the fact, it's a baraita by Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi, and Rabbi Yehuda Hanasi says it is prohibited for an ignorance to eat meat. As it is stated, this is the law, this is the Torah of the beast and the fowl. And Rabbi Yehuda is saying anyone who engages in Torah study is permitted to eat the meat of the animals, and anyone who does not engage in Torah is prohibited to eat the meat of animals or fowl. In other words, there is a connection here that Rabbi Yehuda is doing with eating meat only when you know what are the right rules, the correct rules of shachten and kashren, the animal or the chicken, to eat it. And if you're a common person or an ignorant person, you should not eat meat, because meat is a kind of a luxury, even I would say a halachic luxury, only if you know how to deal with that, with the rules of shchita and kashrut. I just want to say in brackets that today, that all the process of shchita is being done in a different place. Every person, even if they're not baki, if they're not excellent in knowing the rules of the shchita, can buy meat and eat meat. That was allowed to us by God, saying every meat that you would, if you lust to eat meat, you can have meat. But there's some tension here between the idea that the first Adam and Eve were not allowed, or God did not tell them that they can have meat, and it also came with Noach, that is leaving us with a feeling that maybe to eat meat is a secondary permission. It's not a lechatchila. And even when we are permitted to eat meat, there's so many rules and prohibitions and limitations to that heter, to that permit to eat meat. And indeed, Shadal, David Lutzato, the modern time a philosopher and commentator from Italy, Jewish intellect from Italy, and Shadal is saying in a very long piece, he says, I don't understand that, because if God intended for us not to eat meat, he wouldn't have created us with teeth that can chew meat, with digestion system that can digest meat. In other words, says Shadal, of course we were meant to eat meat, but God decided not to say to men, to Adam v'Chava, explicitly, you can kill an animal to eat meat, because he didn't want them to feel that it's too easy or that they should do it often. He wanted to limit that blood shedding, which is allowed, and he created us with an ability to eat meat, but he wanted us to have a more refined attitude towards eating meat. And then after Noach, when everyone were dealing with killing already, God said, okay, now we can permit, we can, God, let's read it here. And God said, and God explained to Noach and his children that they have permission to kill and eat animals, but they do not have permission for a man to kill his brother, though they should kill murderers. In other words, says the Shadal, of course we were built to eat meat. That's when we look at ourselves, we understand that. But God didn't want to say it explicitly, because he wanted us to have a more delicate soul, to not do it so much and not do it unless we really need to do it. But when Noach and the Mabul came and people were engaged with killing each other, God, the sublimation that God made on that desire to kill was, do not kill people, kill animals and eat their flesh. And if a person kills another person, that person should die, because the highest level of moral behavior from a human being is being expected is not to kill another tselem Elokim. And indeed, Rav Kook, in the very famous piece that got the title Chazon HaTzimchonut VaShalom, the vision of vegetarianism and peace. Rav Kook is asking the question, like, if we were there at that level, at that high moral level of not killing animals in order to eat, even though we are allowed to do it and we can do it, but we were in a state, Adam and Chava were in a higher moral state where they did not have the need to eat meat. And then in the time of Noach, after the Mabul, God allowed them and said explicitly that you can kill animals to eat meat. Says Rav Kook, did we lose that high moral state where we didn't even have the need and the lust and the desire and the urge to eat meat? Is that lost forever? And says Rav Kook, at the time of this conquest, conquering the instinct to eat meat has not yet come. Therefore, sometimes meat will be used as food as the price of passage into brighter area. This is the essence of morality when it is joined to its divine source, that is recognized that there is a time for everything, and sometimes it closes off its wellspring in order to gather strength for time to come. Thus, the commandment concerning the eating of meat appeared in a stage which led to the highest goal. The covering of the blood of beast and fowl is the recognition of shame, which is beginning of moral healing, that you may remember and feel ashamed when I have forgiven you. In other words, says Rav Kook, we have it in us to go back to that high moral level of not desiring to eat meat and not having the instinct, to eat meat. We'll get there, but now it's time for everything. Now is a time where God said it's okay to eat meat, and it means that it's okay to eat meat. But there will be a time where we will feel that we want to go get over that urge and get to the higher level where human beings are not going to kill animals anymore to eat their flesh and blood. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe said it in a different way, and he's quoting a pasuk in Tehillim saying, "Back and front, you have afflicted me." And the Rebbe is saying, if a person is worthy, Adam Ra'ui, they say to him, you are the first among creatures. You're the highest creature God created, because you understand that even though you have part of you which is very gashmi, very earthy, you have a very high aspect in you, a soul, a neshama, which comes from up there. But if a person is not worthy, they look at him and they say, eat meat as your soul desire. In other words, there is a level of eating meat which is connecting us to our lower side of desires, of eating the flesh, and the right way, the worthy way, or the goal should be, the aspiration should be to get over that instinct of desiring to eat meat, even though it's permitted, and to try to connect to our high aspect of being first in the creatures, among creatures, and use the animals for the benefit of people and the benefit of the world without hurting the animals.